week 11 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I look to start this week. The first guy, Graham Gano of the New York Giants. Graham Gano, he's been a very solid kicker this year. Very accurate, and he's putting up fantasy points weekly. The last few weeks here for him: Week 7 at Jacksonville, 11. Week 8 at Seattle, 8. And Week 10 versus Houston, 7 fantasy points. So this week here, not the greatest of matchups, believe it or not, on paper. But this Giant offense, they're just not built to score a lot of touchdowns, where they're at least settling for 2 or 3 field goals. So this week here, once again, I think we could see the same from Graham Gano, anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points. He's definitely a kicker this week that's cracked my top 12. And he's a kicker I would start this week. The next guy, Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. So Bass, he's been playing great football once again for this Buffalo Bill team. In the last few weeks here, he's starting to really put up the numbers you expected out of him with a high-powered offense like Buffalo. Week 8 versus Green Bay, 10. Week 9 at the Jets, 7. Week 10 versus Minnesota, 13. And this week here in another good matchup versus the Cleveland Browns that give up the 13th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So right now we're on a 2-game losing streak and a heartbreaking loss in the game of the year coming off the Minnesota Vikings. And this one, I think this Bill team, they're going to get down the field early and often. I wouldn't be surprised if they score 40-plus points in this game with Tyler Bass getting many opportunities, because right now I think this Bill team, they're due for a ball game where they're going to break out and put up a game after blowing that game versus the Jets and losing. And then last week, they were up by 17 points in that one at one point, and the Vikings coming back and winning. So I think Bass this week gets opportunities, and this offense has a real breakout game this week. The next kick is Nick Folk of the New England Patriots. So once again, a good matchup lined up here for Nick Folk. And going back to Week 8 versus the same Jet team, 21 fantasy points. I'm not saying he's going to get 21 fantasy points, but anywhere from 10 to 12 fantasy points is definitely a possibility here for Nick Folk. This offense is an offense that don't finish a lot of drives in New England for touchdowns. And also this Jet defense is a bend but don't break defense that don't give up a lot of touchdowns. So once again, that's going to work in Nick Folk's favor. And the last 2 weeks before the Patriots went on a bye week, Week 8 at the Jets, 21. And Week 9 versus Indianapolis, 17. So this week here versus the Jets, I think 10 to 12 fantasy points is very doable for Folk. And he's a kicker to start this week. The next guy is Robbie Gould of the San Francisco 49ers. So this Niner offense, high-powered offense, tons of weapons, and tons of times they're going to be in the red zone and get opportunities. And over the last 3 weeks here, Robbie Gould's definitely been solid and getting those chances. Like I mentioned, Week 7 versus Kansas City, 14. Week 8 at the Rams, 7. And Week 10 versus the Chargers, 10. So this week here, another indoor game at Arizona that gives up the 7 most fantasy points to kickers on the season. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Robbie Gould once again have another solid ball game where he could get anywhere from 8 to 12 fantasy points in this one. In a ball game where I could see a shootout here for this NFC West matchup. And the 5th and final kicker I look to start this week here is Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals. I know McPherson, it's been a down year for him, no doubt about it. Not big fantasy games. I know last season took the league by storm at the kicking position, but this week here, coming off a bye week, maybe he wasn't 100%. Pretty decent matchup at the Pittsburgh Steelers that are vulnerable to giving up points in a bend but don't break defense as well. And McPherson is due. The last few weeks here for him: Week 6 in New Orleans, 8. Week 7 versus Atlanta, 5. Week 8 at Cleveland, 1. And Week 9 versus Carolina, 6. So this week here, I think he has a nice bounce-back game and coming off the bye, refreshed and ready to go. And he plays in one of the top offenses as well in pro football. So I like McPherson as a start this week. So that's a few kickers I look to start here for Week 11 of the fantasy football season.